My dad was lying face down on a stranger's lawn, arms zip-tied behind his back with one of those plastic ties you get in a multipack from Walmart, while a woman in a bedazzled HOA compliance officer windbreaker stood over him, shouting, "You're under citizen's arrest for mailbox violations!" And the most absurd part? He was smiling, calm as the sunrise. As if being pinned to the grass by a suburban vigilante wasn't even the strangest thing that had happened to him that week. That's when I knew two things. 1. Wisteria Pines had gone full bananas, and 2. Karen Halstead had no idea she just picked a fight with an actual sheriff. 2 days earlier, I rolled into the neighborhood in my beat-up Honda, tired from college life and semi-grateful to be back under my dad's roof for a while. He'd offered to let me crash at his place while I sorted out my next step in life. What he didn't mention was that Wisteria Pines, the seemingly quiet cul-de-sac of pastel houses and perfectly trimmed hedges, had become a strange little dictatorship ruled by a woman with too much time and too many laminated clipboards. The note on my windshield was my first red flag. Scribbled in red pen and taped right under my wiper, it read, "No overnight street parking. Violators will be towed at owner's expense. HOA Code 4.7. Compliance check initiated." Below that was a signature. Officer K. Halstead, Enforcement Division. It would have been terrifying if it wasn't written on the back of a grocery store receipt. My dad just laughed when I showed him. "Karen," he said, like it explained everything. Then he took a sip of his black coffee and went back to assembling his fishing tackle. "She's not even on the HOA board. HOA disbanded years ago. That woman's enforcing rules from a rulebook she wrote herself." The next morning, I heard the chirp of a whistle. Not the pleasant kind, like at a Little League game. This one was shrill, aggressive, and came with a shout of, "Unauthorized trash bins!" I peeked out the window just in time to see Karen marching up our driveway, clipboard in hand, measuring tape on her belt like she was about to inspect the perimeter of a military base. She wore mirrored aviators and a smug expression that suggested she hadn't been challenged since the Reagan administration. My dad was in the garage, sorting through boxes of 4th of July decorations, completely unbothered. Karen marched right up to him and started listing code violations. Our mailbox was apparently 2.3 inches too low, the lawn had visible patches of drought stress, and he hadn't submitted a color harmony form for the flower beds. My dad just blinked at her, nodded once, and said, "You done?" That made her twitch. She wasn't used to being ignored. "I'll be back with the citation," she hissed. "Make sure your son isn't parked on the curb tonight." That night, my dad parked on the curb on purpose. The next day is when it all exploded. Dad left the house to grab some donuts, humming along to Led Zeppelin, when Karen pulled up behind him in a gray SUV that had flashing lights duct taped to the dashboard and a fake decal on the door that read, "Wisteria Pines Patrol." She'd gone full cop cosplay. She pulled him over right on Magnolia Lane, in front of old Mrs. Vasquez's begonias. According to 3 different neighbors, Karen stormed out of her car holding a megaphone and shouting, "Step out of the vehicle! This is an HOA security intervention." My dad, confused but calm, rolled down his window and asked if she was serious. She screamed something about reckless endangerment and non-compliant window tint. Then she tried to drag him out of the car. Now, my dad is a pretty easygoing guy. He doesn't like drama. But he also spent 25 years as sheriff of this county, and doesn't take kindly to being manhandled by someone whose idea of law enforcement training is watching crime documentaries at 1.5x speed. So he let her zip-tie him. Just to see how far she'd go. "I figured it'd be funnier if she hung herself with her own rope," he told me later, lying on the couch with an ice pack on his shoulder. The whole thing would have stayed neighborhood gossip. Funny, weird, a little tragic, if Deputy Danny Martinez hadn't shown up when she did. She rolled up just as Karen was radioing into her command center, which was actually just her husband Greg sitting in a foldable chair with a walkie-talkie. Danny took one look at the scene, paused, then slowly stepped out of her cruiser like she was trying not to scare a wild animal. Karen, not missing a beat, pointed at Danny and shouted, "Back up! Good! Arrest this man! He's resisting HOA compliance orders!" Danny blinked, looked down at my dad, still lying calmly on the grass, zip-tied, with powdered sugar on his shirt, and said, "Karen, what the hell is going on?" Karen launched into a 10-minute monologue about how my dad had violated multiple neighborhood statutes, endangered children with his street parking, and disrespected the sacred order of the HOA covenant. She even tried to hand Danny a ticket she'd printed on pastel paper with Comic Sans font. Danny didn't say much. She just knelt down, cut the zip ties with a utility knife, and helped my dad up. Then she turned to Karen and said, in the driest voice imaginable, "Karen, this is Sheriff Rick Turner. Retired. Consultant to the county sheriff's department. Which means he technically outranks me. Which means—" She let the sentence hang. Karen's face drained of color. Then went red. Then purple. "He parked the wrong way," she said weakly. "There's a code. There's always a code. There is no HOA," Danny said. "Not a real one. Not anymore. You're not allowed to pull people over, Karen. That's a felony." The neighborhood was never the same after that. But neither was Karen. Because even after being exposed, humiliated, and threatened with charges, she wasn't done. Not even close. The day after the zip-tie debacle, things were supposed to go back to normal. My dad took it in stride like he always did, joking that he hadn't had that much excitement since the meth lab exploded behind the bowling alley back in 2011. But something in the neighborhood had shifted. People weren't just whispering anymore, they were watching. Lawn chairs popped up on porches facing the street like popcorn kernels in a microwave. It was as if the whole suburb knew something was coming. And they were waiting for the next act. Karen, surprisingly, went quiet. For a day. Maybe a day and a half if you're generous. Then she came back with something bigger. Something bolder. She didn't just want to enforce fake rules now, she wanted to make an example. And in her twisted little suburban rulebook, Rick Turner had become public enemy number one. Dad had to attend a council meeting across town that morning, some boring zoning advisory group he agreed to help with to stay semi-retired but not rusted shut. He grabbed his coffee, his aviators, and the keys to the old Crown Vic he'd kept out of nostalgia more than anything. It still had the radio, the old spotlights, and the kind of presence that made people sit up a little straighter when it rolled by. He loved that car. I watched from the porch as he pulled out of the driveway, and maybe it was nothing, but I swear I saw Karen's SUV ghosting down the block 2 minutes later, creeping at 12 miles an hour like a shark in beige. I decided to follow them. Not for drama, okay, yes, for drama, but also because something felt off. I tossed on a hoodie, grabbed my bike, and kept a good distance behind. What I didn't expect was to witness a full-blown fake traffic stop go down in the middle of Sycamore Lane. Karen had her SUV parked diagonally across the road like a discount SWAT barricade. Lights flashing. Siren wailing. Yes, she had a siren now. It was one of those handheld megaphone types you get at novelty stores. She blared it like she was chasing bank robbers. Dad was sitting calmly in his Crown Vic, engine off, sunglasses on, hands on the wheel like it was a DMV test. Karen stomped toward the car with a folder under one arm and a laminated badge around her neck that read, "Chief Enforcer, Wisteria Pines Residential Command." I had to duck behind a parked minivan to keep from laughing out loud. Karen started barking orders. "License and registration. You are in direct violation of Community Code 12.6.7a, failure to maintain vehicular aesthetic integrity." Dad rolled down the window and calmly asked what that meant. Karen, undeterred, launched into a speech about how the Crown Vic was an aggressive and inappropriate vehicle for a residential neighborhood, citing its black and white paint scheme and retired law enforcement decals as a visual provocation. "You mean it looks like a cop car?" Dad said flatly. Karen nodded with satisfaction. "Exactly. It creates an atmosphere of undue authority and threatens the visual harmony of our community." Dad chuckled. You're impersonating a law enforcement officer in a car with stick-on decals and Amazon lights. You want to talk about undue authority? That's when Karen lost it. She ordered him out of the vehicle again. This time, she had backup. From her car stepped her husband Greg, looking utterly defeated and holding what looked like a Nerf gun painted black. Karen shoved a paper into my dad's face. It was an official-looking notice of civil suburban infraction, which, upon closer inspection later, turned out to be printed on stationery from a cat-themed Etsy shop. My dad got out. Slowly. Calmly. He turned to Greg and asked, "You really going along with this?" Greg didn't respond. Just stared at the ground. Karen began reciting some faux Miranda rights that involved surrendering your front yard privileges and barbecue hosting licenses. Then she tried to handcuff him again, this time with fuzzy pink cuffs. That's when things crossed from ridiculous into disturbing. She shoved my dad against the hood of his car. Not hard, but hard enough to leave a mark. She started yelling at him to comply with the residential tribunal, and to renounce his noncompliance in writing. At that exact moment, Deputy Danny Martinez pulled up in her cruiser. She didn't even put the car in park before stepping out. "Karen," she called, calm but firm. "Step away from him." Karen turned to her, arms flailing. "This man is a threat to neighborhood cohesion. He's a rogue. A disruptive element. A habitual code violator." Danny approached carefully. "You've assaulted a man, Karen. That's real jail time. This isn't a game anymore. Let him go." Karen's voice dropped. "He's not just any man. He's the one thing standing between us and order. You think this street doesn't notice? The garbage bins left out past 10 a.m.? The lawn gnomes multiplying unchecked? Someone has to take a stand." My dad slowly stood up straight, cracked his neck, and turned to face her. "You know I was the sheriff of this county, right?" Karen raised her chin. "Former sheriff. You're just a man now. A man who parked illegally and disrespected the community vision agreement." Danny looked exhausted. She took a breath, stepped between them, and said, "Karen, this is your last warning. You do not have the authority to detain anyone. You are not law enforcement. And this entire operation," she gestured toward the SUV and Greg, who was now trying to slowly walk backwards to the car, "is illegal." Karen stepped back. But only slightly. "You're all part of it. The decline? The rot. I'll fix it myself if I have to." That's when my dad, still calm, pointed to her SUV and said, "You know impersonating a peace officer carries up to a year in county jail, right? You've got flashing lights, badges, a uniform. You pulled me over. You cuffed me. That's not a slap on the wrist." Karen blinked. You could see the wheels turning. The illusion cracking. Greg finally spoke. "Karen, maybe we just go home. Let's just build a birdhouse. Together." Karen looked at him like he'd spoken another language. Then she turned on her heel, stormed back to her SUV, and drove off without a word. No sirens this time. Danny helped my dad into the cruiser to give a statement. I finally came out from behind the minivan, my phone buzzing with texts. The neighborhood had filmed everything. It was already on Facebook. 17 shares. 2 slow-motion edits. That night, we sat in the living room, my dad with a cold beer, me with leftover takeout, watching the video loop on someone's social media story. Karen's voice, yelling about vehicular aesthetics, echoed through the speakers. Dad raised his bottle in a toast. "To neighborhood harmony," he said dryly. But I could tell it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. And whatever she was planning next would make this look like a warm-up act. Karen's silence didn't mean she had given up. It meant she was working on something. The way the neighborhood felt in the days after the second showdown, tense, oddly quiet, almost coordinated, proved it. Porch lights flicked on at the same time every night. Trash bins stood in eerily perfect rows, like suburban soldiers. People stopped making eye contact. Conversations that used to happen freely on sidewalks now happened in whispers behind hedges. Karen was back, and this time, she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was building an army. It started small. Flyers slipped into mailboxes with no postage. Neighborhood Harmony Task Force Informational Session, this Thursday. Location, disclosed upon RSVP. The invitation had Karen's fingerprints all over it. Dramatic fonts. Excessive use of capital letters. And a weird watermark of an eagle perched on a picket fence. My dad took one look at it and chuckled. "The ladies forming a cult," he said, folding the paper like it was junk mail. "A very beige cult." I, on the other hand, was deeply curious. Something about the whole thing had escalated from neighborhood nuisance to full-blown mystery. There was a strange thrill in watching this twisted little utopia crack open. So I RSVP'd. Of course I did. I used a fake name, Josh Cranston, and a burner email just in case Karen was tracking responses. She sent me a time, a location, and a note that said, "Dress code enforced. Business casual or higher." The meeting took place in the basement of the community center, which I didn't even know had a basement. When I got there, the door was guarded by two men in matching khakis and navy polo shirts embroidered with security. One of them had a walkie-talkie. The other held a binder. They looked at me suspiciously until I gave them the name I'd used. "Cranston," I said. "Here for the task force." They nodded and stepped aside. The room was dimly lit, with folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around a small projector screen. On the screen was a slideshow titled, "Operation Order Restored." Karen stood at the front, wearing a navy blue blazer over what appeared to be a tactical vest. Greg sat beside her, looking like a man held hostage by his own indecision. There were maybe 15 people in the room. All looked like they'd been dragged into this slowly, one citation at a time. Karen launched into a presentation that would have made Orwell blush. She spoke of neighborhood decay units, visual threat grading scales, and something she called architectural purity enforcement. Each slide was worse than the last. One diagram included a chart that rated exterior paint colors on a Serenity Index. Another compared mismatched patio furniture to civil erosion. The part that really chilled me was when she clicked to a map of wisteria pines, marked with tiny red dots. "These," she said, "are the violators. The holdouts. The non-compliance." Then she pointed to one dot in the center of the map. "Our house." She didn't name my dad directly, but everyone knew. "There are those among us," she said, "who refuse to play by the rules. Who challenge order. Who invite chaos onto our very lawns. We will not let them win. Not while we have binders and bylaws." The room applauded. Not loudly. Not joyfully. More like nervous clapping at a school assembly. I slipped out before the Q&A started, heart racing. Karen had gone from clipboard-carrying busybody to full-on suburban warlord. And now, she had foot soldiers. I told my dad everything. He didn't seem surprised. He just turned up the volume on the ball game and said, "Let her run her little cult. Let her file her little reports. The minute she steps over the line, we drop the hammer." But I wasn't so sure waiting was the best move. I wanted to expose her, to break the spell she had over the neighborhood. That's when Danny and I came up with the plan. It started with the footage. Karen's GoPro had been mounted during both incidents, first when she zip-tied my dad, then again during the fake traffic stop. We got the files from a neighbor who'd borrowed Karen's camera to digitize her footage for the HOA archive, then quietly uploaded them to a USB and gave it to me. I spent 2 straight nights editing. Added dramatic music, zoomed in on Karen's crazed eyes, included slow-motion replays of her screaming about mailbox height regulations. The final touch? A freeze frame at the exact moment she waved her fake badge in Danny's face, followed by a title card that read, "Suburbia's Most Wanted." Then came the gala. Karen had planned a neighborhood unity gala, complete with catered appetizers and a slideshow of successful compliance transformations. It was held at the clubhouse, decorated with patriotic bunting and color-coded tablecloths. She wore a tiara. Yes, an actual tiara. Said it symbolized leadership clarity. Danny and I arrived fashionably late, dressed in matching tuxedos we borrowed from her cousin's wedding stash. We made our entrance just as Karen took the stage to accept the first Community Heroism Award, which she had awarded to herself. I plugged the USB into the projector while Danny distracted her with a fake question about fence staying regulations. The lights dimmed. The music started. And then chaos. The video played in full. Karen's speeches, her rants, her detainments. Every exaggeration, every false claim, every time she shouted, "I am the law!" It all unfolded on a 20-foot screen in glorious high definition. Gasps echoed. People looked at each other. Greg buried his face in his hands. One woman quietly whispered, "She cuffed the sheriff?" Karen tried to unplug the projector, but Danny stepped in and gently moved her aside. "Let it finish," she said. "Transparency's important." The applause when it ended wasn't loud. It was hesitant. But it was real. People were finally seeing it. The absurdity. The danger. The woman they'd let take control without a vote, or a title, or a shred of legitimacy. But just when I thought we'd won, Karen walked back to the stage, picked up the microphone, and smiled. "That," she said, "was an excellent dramatization. Very creative editing. But don't be fooled. The chaos is still out there. And I will not stop until every street lamp is uniformly spaced, every garbage bin is regulation, and every citizen lives without fear of disorder." And then she dropped the mic. Literally dropped it. Karen stormed out, flanked by her two security guys, who now looked deeply unsure of their career choices. The room was stunned. And for a moment, I felt a weird mix of triumph and dread. We'd embarrassed her. But we hadn't stopped her. Because Karen wasn't just some rule-obsessed neighbor anymore. She was something else now. Something worse. She thought she was the hero. And people who think they're heroes, those are the ones you really have to watch out for. The neighborhood didn't sleep that night. Lights stayed on behind blinds, voices murmured behind fences, and the community group chat was flooded with message after message. Some defended Karen, claiming the video had been taken out of context. Others were horrified that they had been following the commands of someone who zip-tied a retired sheriff. But most people were just confused. Wisteria Pines had never been exciting, never been divided, never had drama worth mentioning. Now, it felt like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And, of course, Karen had won. My dad stayed quiet about the whole gala disaster. He didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. He just sat on the porch the next morning, sipping his coffee, nodding at every neighbor who passed by. A few gave him thumbs. One guy mouthed, "Thank you," like my dad had liberated a village. He didn't react to any of it. He just said, "She'll come harder now. People like Karen don't back down. They double down." And he was right. Later that afternoon, an envelope was taped to our door. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with bold, centered text. It read, "You are hereby summoned to appear before the Neighborhood Code Review Committee for a formal hearing on your continued non-compliance, misconduct, and behavior unbecoming of a resident. Refusal to appear will result in sanctions." There was no date, no time, just a signature. Chairwoman Karen Halstead. My dad held the letter between two fingers like it might be contagious. "She made herself a committee now," he said. "Next thing you know, she'll be printing currency." I expected him to tear it up, ignore it, maybe even laugh it off. But instead, he went inside, grabbed the thick HOA binder from the attic, the real one, not Karen's DIY fantasy, and spent the next few hours reading it like a novel. Page after page, sticky notes, highlighters, muttering to himself. I asked what he was doing and he simply said, "If she wants a hearing, I'm going to give her one. But we're playing by the real rules this time. What followed was the most bizarre suburban courtroom drama anyone could imagine. Karen transformed the community clubhouse into her tribunal chamber. She hung blackout curtains, added podiums, and set up a fake witness stand made from stacked milk crates. There were chairs for the jury, although it was just 6 of her closest followers, people who owed her favors or were too afraid to say no. Greg tried to talk her out of it, from what I heard, but she threatened to ban him from the patio if he didn't support her vision. The room filled with neighbors. Some curious. Some angry. Some just bored. My dad walked in wearing his old sheriff's jacket, calm and unshaken. I followed behind, phone in hand, ready to record everything. Danny came too, not in uniform, just as a silent observer. But the moment Karen saw her, she muttered something about intimidation tactics. Karen began by slamming a gavel onto a dinner plate. She declared the Community Code Tribunal open and accused my dad of 7 violations, including unauthorized vehicle display, obstruction of decorative unity, and inciting neighborhood instability. My dad raised one eyebrow and asked if she was going to read him his rights or just keep inventing nonsense. She didn't appreciate that. Her opening argument included a slideshow of photos taken over the past few weeks, our trash bins with the lids slightly open, a garden gnome that had tipped over, and a picture of my dad mowing the lawn shirtless, which she claimed was aesthetic harassment. When it was his turn to respond, my dad didn't even stand up. He pulled out the real HOA charter, flipped to the section on neighborhood authority, and began reading. Slowly. Clearly. Every single point dismantled Karen's claims. The HOA had disbanded 5 years ago, which meant all codes were null and void unless reinstated by a democratic vote with board oversight. The decorative unity clause she cited was actually a recommendation, not a requirement. And as for inciting instability, he calmly pointed out that only one person in the neighborhood had zip-tied anyone in the past month, and it wasn't him. The room shifted. People started whispering. Karen tried to interrupt, but my dad didn't stop. He had momentum now. He held up a document showing she'd forged community notices. He revealed testimony from 3 neighbors who said they'd been threatened with citations unless they moved their cars. Then, he dropped the final piece. Greg stood up from the back row and walked to the front, holding a folder. His voice shook at first, but he found his courage. Karen forged signatures. She created fake bylaws. She bought those security shirts on eBay. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to embarrass her. But this has gone too far. She's been threatening people. Bullying them. And I can't be part of it anymore. Karen's mouth opened. No words came out. Greg placed the folder on the table and quietly sat back down. For a moment, the entire clubhouse was dead silent. Then Danny stood up and walked to the front. She pulled out a printed report, an official one this time. We've been reviewing the footage, she said. And based on what we've seen, there are grounds for criminal charges. Impersonating law enforcement. Assault. Coercion. We're not pressing them yet, but if there's one more incident, we will. Karen stood frozen behind her podium. Her hands clenched the gavel. Then, without a word, she picked up her clipboard, walked out of the room, and disappeared into the hallway. No grand speech. No meltdown. Just silence. After the hearing, people stayed behind, talking in small groups. The mood had changed. The spell was broken. Nobody was scared anymore. They'd seen the truth, and it wasn't just funny anymore, it was sad. Karen had built her identity around being in charge, and now that power was gone. In the days that followed, things got quieter. Neighbors started saying hi again. Trash bins stayed out a little longer. Lawn gnomes popped up in more yards, almost like a symbol of rebellion. Greg started building birdhouses in his garage and told me he was thinking of opening a small shop in town. He even asked if I'd help him design a website. I said sure. My dad finally retired for real. No more consultant work, no more patrols. Just fishing trips, backyard grilling, and playing classic rock a little too loud on weekend mornings. Danny and I went out for coffee. Then lunch. Then dinner. Something about taking down a suburban tyrant together makes dating easier, I guess. As for Karen, nobody saw her for a while. Rumor had it she tried to start a new HOA in a prison book club after visiting a relative, but nobody could verify that. The last confirmed sighting was her walking her dog 3 towns over, wearing oversized sunglasses and muttering about neighborhood chaos. Wisteria Pines slowly went back to being a sleepy, quiet neighborhood. But every time a rule seemed too strict, or someone tried to tell someone else where to park, we all remembered the time the sheriff got zip-tied in his own front yard by a woman in a fake badge. And none of us forgot how fast something peaceful could turn ridiculous. And how important it is to know who you're dealing with before you try to drag someone out of their car. Especially when that someone used to wear a real badge.